Coming up, with a short week ahead and Dallas looming on Thanksgiving, we take a look at injury reports, a little bit of reflective perspective back onto that Lions game, and whether or not the New York Football Giants and the fan base can still be confident about getting that playoff seeding locked up. Yes, friends. It's OGP, the One Giant Podcast, where, of course, we are your host over here, Adam Armbrecht, over there, Andy Makowitz. Let's just dispense with the pleasantries, Andrew, because there's actually a lot to get to here. Short week. It's Tuesday. We said some of the things maybe we talk about today are going to be about this Dallas game coming up, too. It's mostly internal reflection, but every player that we touch on here today is going to have serious impacts on whether or not the Giants can be successful going forward. Good morning, sir.
Good morning. Busy day. Trying to wrap some stuff up before Turkey Day. Want to be happy and situated on the couch, getting ready for our New York Football Giants, baby.
You better believe it. So we're going to touch on a few different things here. As I said, looking back at this Detroit Lions game a little bit and maybe where some of the blame gets to go around. I think we kind of battered around a lot of different things we want to get to today. The first one, though, because it is definitive, is Wandale Robinson, the ACL, officially done for the year. And it got me thinking as we went back and we talked about it last episode. Andy had his reservations about drafting a small, not even a slot receiver, but a really small slot receiver. Knowing that he's done for the year, how do you look back on Wandale Robinson's rookie season? 23 catches on 31 targets, 227 yards, got that first touchdown of his rookie year, 9.9 yards per catch. I mean, we know this last game really was the breakout one for him. Do you feel like you can give a definitive statement on his rookie season and on what he is for this team?
I do. I think we saw exactly what it is that makes Wandale Robinson great, and I think we also saw what the question marks were concerning him coming out of college. I really do think this was a perfect encapsulation of what Wandale Robinson is. When healthy, he is a receiver that can get open in short, quick areas and can help you move the ball down the field. You saw it in the last game, 9 catches for over 100 yards. It's like that is what Joe Shane and this coaching staff saw in Wandale Robinson. What we talked about before, I had my reservations about it, was the fact that he was so small and that was going to lead to injuries. He played the opening game, had 1 catch, then was out for over a month.
Sure.
Then he played 5 games. It was a freak injury on the turf, out for the season. He might actually be out for half of next season based on the timing of all this. And so for me, it's tough because you see the promise, but I'm also like, this is exactly why. But I mean, Adam, I'll give you one other piece of this on the Wandale Robinson piece. It's not that it wasn't good to pick a wide receiver at that spot. It was that, George Pickens from the Pittsburgh Steelers went 8 or 9 picks later. Alec Pierce went right after him. Sky Moore went right after him. Well, if
we're going to have a conversation about a guy they should have picked, and I've been standing on this soapbox, and I'm going to keep doing it because I keep going back and remembering the players that I looked at that position that I thought the Giants could have taken in the last several drafts. I am good at evaluating wide receivers, and Alec Pierce looks like a guy that's going to be a player.
He was your guy. I obviously liked Sky Moore. Alec Pierce has been great. He's had 28 catches, 424 yards, and a touchdown. He's basically doubled the production
in a messy Colts offense, by the way.
Right, with Sam Ehlinger, coach getting fired, Sam Ehlinger doing what he's doing, getting benched, Matt Ryan coming back from the dead. It's like it just reinforces that it was right to pick a wide receiver there because we are seeing how thin our wide receiver room is. The tough part is you and me both would have probably gone in other directions. Now we're Giant fans through and through, Adam, but it's okay to be critical and say we would have preferred a different pick. It's not a slight on Wandale Robinson. It's just a preference there.
Yeah, you draft. We always say once the player gets drafted, he's a Giant, and we start getting excited about what they can be for this team. but there's plenty of potentially other opportunities. And we'll maybe get into that as the off season down the road here. What could have been different for this team? And we're also going to touch on it here a little bit later, reflecting on Joe Shane in his first year as the GM. There's some things that are coming up now, from one high profile rookie to an even more high profile rookie. Kayvon Thibodeau came out and said he doesn't think he's had a bad game all year. And by the way, we talked about this last episode and last couple of weeks, really. Seems like there's plenty of instances where he is being held, maybe even being choke held at times by offensive linemen. So this isn't necessarily a referendum on what he is, but you've got the stats here for, again, a top 10 draft pick. There are expectations that come with that.
Yeah, listen, he came out as you said and said, I haven't played a bad game." And you know what? I agree with Kayvon Thibodeau. He
Mhm.
hasn't played a bad game. But when you're drafted in the top 10 of the NFL draft, there is an expectation that you're going to play a lot of good games, not I didn't have a bad game, which is a slight little distinction, when you think about it. When you talk about the stats, Thibodeau only has 1 sack, 18 tackles, and he has about 7 quarterback pressures. Now, remember, he missed a couple of games early on with the injury. So obviously, those stats are not going to be as cumulative as some of the other players. But I mean, you know, you look at it and you're like, okay, that's okay production for what he's been out there. But yeah, it does make you long a little bit more for some of those key stats, like Aiden Hutchinson of the Lions, who we just saw, had an interception, had a sack. He's got 5.5 sacks, multiple picks this year. You feel like he's a game wrecker right now for the Lions.
Yeah, and you talk about, I mean, listen, he's been in for now 2, 4, 6, 7 games. So 7 out of the 10 games. He's missed 3 over the course of this season. And listen, I mean, on the one hand, and by the way, it's a really good comparison with Hutchinson. Now, obviously, I think you go back to the draft and Hutchinson is that's the gem, right? But Kayvon Thibodeau was really highly regarded. And I'll just say, while you can look at Dexter Lawrence and see how he's been more productive, and we talked about this off pod after yesterday, and say, hey, the impact of Kayvon Thibodeau's presence can be helping this defense overall. I agree with that. And also, the Detroit Lions are a terrible defense, and Hutchinson is still showing up in the box score as well as on the field. Thibodeau's had some tip balls. You mentioned his really smart play, not getting sucked in and going after Goff and deflecting a pass. This isn't a negative on Kayvon Thibodeau, but I think coming off of this loss and just thinking about where this team is, you take that big picture and you go, okay, I'd love to see. Listen, we got 7 more games here. So Kayvon Thibodeau, I want to see 1 sack. Show me 5 sacks by the end of the year. I don't think it's unreasonable to start to say, as you get those reps underneath your belt here, you really start to ramp up your production and your ability to take on offensive linemen and beat them at the point of attack. We won't get into the size that someone had brought up, although go ahead.
No. You're right. The size thing is silly to me.
Yeah.
He's a freak athlete. I don't think anyone really cares about his size in run blocking. Like he's there to wreak havoc. I think another good comparison. We talked about Aiden Hutchinson. Obviously, he's been doing everything, but we all seem to forget that Aiden Hutchinson didn't go number 1 overall. Trayvon Walker actually went
Yeah.
number 1 overall, which everyone seems to forget about. He's had 36 tackles, 2.5 sacks, and 1 interception that he had in the first game. His production hasn't been up to the level of what I think people would have expected. He's got a 61 Pro Football Focus grade. Kayvon Thibodeau has a 63. It's like we say, you use it with a grain of salt, but it is a data point to say like they're both kind of like doing okay as rookies. When Aiden Hutchinson is showing out the way that he is, it really kind of like skews your view of what a rookie can contribute.
Yeah, it'll be interesting at the back end of this season to compare some of the high profile defensive players that were taken in this draft. And then, as will be a factor, and we 100% agree with it, how does it reflect what the record of those teams are and how good the seasons were for those franchises, right? Because that's ultimately the collective effort we want to talk about. From the second high profile player that we're mentioning to the third injury report for the New York Football Giants. There's one on here that I already told Andy about on the front end that certainly surprised him. Monday was a walkthrough session for the New York Football Giants. DNPs for Bellinger, Izuda, Feliciano, obviously Adoree Jackson, Richie James, Fabian Monroe, Tyree Phillips, but limited practice for Evan Neal dealing with the knee. We think that it was a chance he maybe could have played against Detroit, but you want to have him for this big game against Dallas. And then shock and awe for Andrew Makowitz, Jason Pinnock, limited practice. Jaw be damned. The guy's back out there doing the walkthrough.
They literally helped him. Like people helped him
That's right.
from the bench into the ambulance and
Mhm.
immediately to the hospital to get
Sure.
his jaw checked out. I
That's the
thought that
problem.
was going to be like a cracked jaw out for the season type of thing. To
Yeah.
hear even in a walkthrough that he's a limited participant, it's like, how is Richie James not even like? Are they bubble wrapping Richie James now that Wandale Robinson is out? Like, why is he not practicing it? It that was a very surprising one to me. It's good to hear that obviously Evan Neal is back. You know, take it with a grain of salt because it is a walkthrough. What's really going to matter is the injury report today and Wednesday. If we can't get limited participation in either of those days, there's almost no chance of them playing on Thanksgiving.
Yeah, and you have to look inside of this, and we're going to talk about here in a second. That there's we now have, including Evan Neal, who was limited practice, but DNP's 3 offensive linemen, 2 of which, well, I guess one has been Feliciano, who has been starting. Ozuta has been doing spot starts and ended up starting the second half of the Detroit game, and then Tyree Phillips, who's been playing several games, obviously, over here. So 3 key contributors on the offensive line beyond Evan Neal, who we're waiting to see how he'll come back. It brings us then to the next conversation we want to have about this roster, which is, I think, there was a great article, a great little write up over on Fansided, came in from Desmond Novak, who talked about disappointments in the first half of the first 10 games of the season for the New York Football Giants. And there's some obvious ones on the back end, like Kenny Golladay. Listen, I really don't need to talk about Kenny Golladay being a disappointment. We're all pretty clear on that. But the first one that I think becomes the most critical one is Darnay Holmes, because you and I talked about it, man. When we're going back to training camp, it was, this guy really looks like, man, he is playing, he's balling out, he's looking strong, he's making a lot of plays. And now it's like he was already a disappointment to this point of the season. But now maybe Pinnock's able to play a little bit. I know that's safety, but just secondary overall. Noah Dory Jackson, Williams is going to be back in this mix here, but he didn't play last year and is coming back from injuries this offseason. You have a rookie in Cordell Flott. Like, not only does Darnay Holmes going to need to be playing, but he's going to need to be playing really sound, consistent football here, because whether it's in the nickel package, whether they move him around, like, he's critical. Like, he's critical to the success of this team, I think, because we talk about the Moreaus and these other players, but just remember, that's always been contingent on the fact that Adoree Jackson was out there. It's always been contingent on the fact that Xavier McKinney had been back there. Take away 2 of the best players on this secondary, all of a sudden things start to look a little bit different, and a lot of players start to get exposed.
You mentioned Fabian Moreau. He didn't practice too. He got hurt with a rib injury in the
Yeah.
game as well. So even him being alongside of Dory Jackson, neither of those players may be out there, which even highlights the need for Darnay Holmes to play meaningful snaps for the Giants.
I was just a shout out McLeod, who had some nice plays, had a couple of mistakes, and again, he falls into the same boat. You're excited when they make the play, but like it's what we talk about the wide receiver room that maybe we'll touch on here a little bit today too. It's like, yes, you like when they make the plays, but the second that David Sills drops a ball, you can't turn around and be disgusted by it. The reality is you have to think about the reality of what the player is, and that's what 50%, 60% of this secondary right now.
Yeah, and the Darnay Holmes thing, to your point, though, it's surprising because all training camp they were talking up Darnay Holmes as
Yep.
a guy that was going to be a key contributor. They kept saying, "Look at him; he's leading this defense. He could be one of those guys. It's his ascension." And he's had 22 tackles on the year, had a 47 Pro Football Focus rating in
Yep.
coverage. One forced fumble. It feels like he's kind of just been buried on the depth chart, and they're picking guys up off the practice squad to play cornerback before they're even giving Darnay Holmes those snaps. That to me is a red flag. It's very concerning, especially because we're going to need those snaps from him in the next, I don't know, 6 weeks.
Speaking of disappointments, and this is something that's going to extend us a little bit into the Joe Shane realm, and I want to be clear here. Like, we know exactly what we're doing. We're laying down some frustrations around this Giants team right now. They've had a very successful season. They are 7-3, and it doesn't mean that you don't get to evaluate things, that you don't get to be critical of what's gone on to this point in areas of the team that you're frustrated by. The other one that was listed inside of this was, of course, the Feliciano Glowinski signings. Now, on the surface, remember back then, it's funny. We said Glowinski's the one you really invested some money into, but remember it was 3.25 million for Feliciano to come in and play center here. And this past game, you had Zudu come back in, and here's a little footnote for you, which I'm going to sidebar this here. I'm going to derail this conversation because we said it last episode about not understanding what the state of Shane Lemieux was and putting him in to start this first half and then going to your rookie Joshua Azuda. So the opinion there is, and that's okay, that Azuda, listen, we don't want to overexpose this kid. He's a rookie. We want to develop him. Looks like Shane Lemieux is ready to play. When you put a player out there, and we understand metrics, there's all different versions of it, he got a 0. He got a 0 for his grade in that first half of reps. You can't tell. Like, I don't know. And by the way, it just goes back to, what is this team doing in practices in terms of the competitiveness from what we have on the defensive side? Like, what does it speak to in that regard? I don't know how you come out of a practice, plug in Shane Lemieux, and then turn around and go, oh, it was so bad in the first half that we had to pull him and go to Joshua Zuda, let alone we know Nick Gates gets in there for Feliciano, and we understand everything else that's happening on that line. There's just a level of frustration, limited money, limited moves to be made this offseason, but two key ones that you made right now, Andy, coin flip about who you think would have the better remaining 7 games between Nick Gates and Feliciano.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I mean, you saw Nick Gates in his pass blocking. If you take away the what every Giant fan does and cringes every time that Nick Gates gets out there because you're so worried about him getting injured, if
Yeah,
you can move
take away
that
that
off to
part.
the side, like he is still a competent football player when he's out there. He is very versatile. Obviously, he started at offensive tackle, moved over to guard. They're saying he could play center. He was signed to play center under Dave Gettleman. He it literally is a coin flip. Now, a lot of the people that are closer in the building, guys like Art Stapleton, stress the importance of Feliciano. They say that he is a guy that the Giants need. He is a guy that
Oh,
contributes more
100%.
than yeah, but he also says he contributes more than what meets the eye, which
Okay.
I clearly I'm not seeing it, and I don't think you are either. It feels like he's been underperforming since that he's gotten here. To your point, I would probably think that if Nick Gates stays healthy, he has the inside track to be able to take that starting center role from Feliciano.
Yeah, and again, like, I don't want to, for Feliciano, it's like, I don't want to overstate it. We said at the time, right? Here's a guy, never played center. You're going to sign him. You're going to convert him over. Maybe this opens up an opportunity where Feliciano can go back to his traditional role at guard, and that feels stronger. Pair him right there next to Nick Gates on the left side if Azuda isn't fully ready. The funny thing about all of this is the idea of what this season is, and then all of a sudden you start winning games and we start analyzing players in a different light, as opposed to, hey, we're developing these young talents. You want to see Azudu get reps. Now there's going to be lumps there, but that's a part of the process, right? Shane Lemieux aside, coming back from that injury. So it does put me in a weird place trying to evaluate this. But again, if you're talking about trying to fix holes, let's, because I'm inside my own head right now, trying to evaluate. Do I think that Joe Shane did a good job in these signings, specifically on the offensive line, when we think about wanting to have some level of stability here? I think I'm fine with it, but I'm frustrated because you just lost to the Detroit Lions. And specifically, I'm looking at the offensive line and seeing all of Dave Gettleman's players out there.
I think we also forget what the alternative was last year. Like that's another
Never
thing that
hurts,
in
never
our
hurts
head.
to
Like
compare. Yep.
Glowinski, right? The Glowinski signing, we thought like he was going to be kind of that stalwart guard, never have to worry about him. He had a shaky start to the year. We haven't heard much of his name called, which is a good thing over the last couple of weeks if you're an offensive lineman. I think that signing was fine because you had to put the money in the offensive line. He was the best guard that was available. I mean, what else is Joe Shane supposed to do when he's trying to fix this thing to be serviceable? I also think it's been very difficult for Glowinski when it's been Tyree Phillips, Evan Neal, Matt Pert all on the right side, no consistency or continuity. And then Feliciano's in and out of the lineup at center, and you have Nick Gates. It's like he's the only consistent side on that right-hand side.
I'll give you, you know what? Because Andy needs credit, but I'll remind everybody that going back to Andrew Thomas, Andy often pointed to the idea of, like, you keep rotating different players alongside of him, the lack of consistency. And we've seen Andrew Thomas is now, he's going to play solid football no matter who's alongside of him. But early in his career and developing, now Glowinski's a veteran, but to your point, well, Feliciano, new position, trying to get his feet underneath him. Rookie to start Evan Neal, who we know had his struggles at times, and then you start bringing in backups and Phillips. The continuity piece is real. And by the way, this isn't something that becomes a referendum on Joe Shane, but there's two things that I want to kind of get to here to close out this episode. And it's one, I think we were universally praising everything that was happening with Joe Shane and Brian Dable and the whole new regime. But now we're talking about a rookie wide receiver. Maybe it's fluky, whatever. But here's the reality. Wandale Robinson has had injuries. He hasn't been able to be out there and be productive. You're talking about offensive line play that's working through some things. for the most part, you were handcuffed by where you were financially, and it's difficult to try to get beyond that. But remember, Darian Beavers, another key player, contributor for the defense that gets injured. These things happen, but at the highest level, I think the hardest part, as we said throughout the show, not seeing Kayvon Thibodeau maybe be as productive as we were hoping for in his rookie campaign, not seeing Evan Neal just out there, even if it is to take the lumps as we saw early in his career, just like Andrew Thomas, right? Like some of this is just, man, winning the games starts to make you think about making the playoffs and what that can mean for this season. But, and I've fallen under the spell of it. But the reality I kept trying to come back to was this is an evaluation season. And the hardest part is not having the players available to feel like you can confidently evaluate what you have and what you're going to need to accomplish in the offseason.
It's crazy when you look at the draft picks of Joe Shane. Like this is all, take it with a grain of salt. We're 10 games in, but it's like Darian Beavers out, Marcus McKeithen out, DJ Davidson out, Dane Belton been in and out with a broken collarbone, Daniel Bellinger out with an eye socket thing. Cordell Flott was out for a couple of games.
With an
Joshua
eye
Zudu,
socket thing. Love the way that got categorized.
a fractured orbital bone.
There we
You
go.
like that? I'm part-time med school. Cordell Flott out for a little bit. Joshua Zudu has a neck injury. Wandale Robinson has the ACL. Evan Neal has been out with a sprained MCL. And Kayvon Thibodeau missed the first 3 or 4 games. That is the whole entire draft class. The only one that's been relatively healthy is Micah McFadden, and he might have been it might have been the toughest to watch on the field against the Lions last week. So it's just so hard to evaluate a lot of these picks. Well, talk about Joe Shane. He gets all the praise early on with limited cap space, but there's still question marks. 10 games in, the Giants are overperforming record-wise, but it feels like there's so many question marks with all the decisions that have been made that only another year or two is going to really tell.
Last thing we're going to talk about here, obviously tomorrow we'll break down this Dallas matchup, try to get, as Andy said, a little more sense of who's going to be available. It really does look like a potential uphill battle for the New York Football Giants. And by the way, I poked my head over there. They're mostly healthy in Dallas, so feel free to think about that. They made a joke. I read an article that was making a joke about how I think Micah Parsons might have been limited in practice, but it was like, yeah, he's totally fine. It's just the thing that they go through. His biggest struggle is trying to find a place to get a haircut for under $200. This is what other teams get to talk about. They get to talk about haircuts, my friends. But I will say, coming out of that Detroit game, I'm not going to beat anybody up over it. But when you look back and you see how focused the Detroit Lions were on shutting down Saquon Barkley, we've praised this coaching staff for making the in-game adjustments, and maybe primarily Wink Martindale in the defense has been the unit that said, okay, first half was this, watch what we do in the second half. Offensively, we understanding everything that the Giants are dealing with. I do wonder a little bit, and it's more just about, okay, maybe you couldn't make the adjustments in Detroit in real time because you got guys coming in and out and injuries, etc. But boy, you better have a process in place here to come into this Dallas game and have a different way, not just to throw for 340 yards, and that's fine. And, listen, let's take the interceptions off the table for Daniel Jones. It can be a different looking game, but you got to get production out of the running game. And I was a little taken aback by the fact that Detroit's dedication to stopping the run was seemingly met with, yeah, I guess you got us, right? And I understand the offensive line play was not good in run protection, and that can give you a glimmer of hope because they've been so strong in that area. But looking back, I'm frustrated with Mike Kafka and the offense for just going like, all right, I guess we'll just do the thing that they're trying to force us to do, and it ends up leading to a 31-18 loss.
So this is a tough part because you look back and you say we're without our top 3 wide receivers. We don't have our starting tight end. The offensive
justified
line is
excuses.
Turnstile. We have the right tackles, the third string right tackle. Like there's a lot of things that are going on that may limit Mike Kafka's ability to call certain plays or do things that he wants to do. Yep. But guess what, Adam? Those problems are still going to be there on Thursday. And so we have to create a scheme that manages those expectations. Those problems still exist. It's not like we can't just go to the next game and be like, well, those don't exist anymore. It's like, no, we are going to be down Wandale Robinson. We don't even know if Richie James is going to play. It's going to be Kenny Galladay and Darius Slayton out there. We don't know if it's going to be Evan Neal. Listen, Mike Kafka, The play calling didn't work. Obviously, your play calling always looks better when Saquon Barkley breaks a 40-yard run. It makes everyone look like a genius. But if it's not working, we cannot pound our head against the wall. They have to find ways to get the ball out of Jones's hands quickly, or it's got to be a heavy screen game for the Giants, knowing that DeMarcus Lawrence and Micah Parsons are going to be at or around Daniel Jones every time he drops back to pass.
Yeah, and again, I think that like a lot of the offensive evaluation, understandably, is going to go into next season for Mike Kafka, right? Because you like to think, hey, I have the creativity, I have the ability. You saw what I could do in Kansas City. Now, also, you're going to need to give me the personnel in order to accomplish that. So this isn't like, again, it's not a referendum on his career as a Giants offensive coordinator. But to your point, it's not going to look different this upcoming week by and large. And one of the things I'll just note in terms of disappointments that were listed inside of that article, Kenny Golladay was on that list. I mean, you want a layup of a statement. We could all do that. He also threw in Tate Crowder on the defensive side, which I think is really hard for me to swallow given the fact that he is Mr. Irrelevant. And by and large, I think he's played fine. It's just that he shouldn't be your starter. And we've said that from day one. But like you say, I got to see something here from an ability to create opportunities. And we're going to talk about it tomorrow, man. We know what the first game looked like. It was easily the most difficult game to watch from an offensive perspective, because that was the one where a lot of people were giving Daniel Jones credit for just flat out standing in there and getting his butt kicked over and over and over again, and kept getting back up and saying, sure, thank you. Can I have another? Right. But one thing I'll add to, and we'll talk about this more tomorrow, is the one element that I thought, and I was of two minds about this in the Detroit game. When you go back in and you look at it and you say they absolutely shut down Saquon Barkley, 15 carries, 22 yards. The one thing that I'll acknowledge in this, and this is again something that's a little bit frustrating in reflection, Daniel Jones had 7 carries for 50 yards. Now, those moments, we know the more that you run is the more likely that they start to pick up on that and they make adjustments. And Daniel Jones took some pretty hard hits in there, mixed in there, where I was a little starting to get that, tightening up a little bit, starting to get that sweat across the brow around him potentially getting injured. But boy, in a game like that, when they're shutting down Barkley, I got to see 10 plus carries for Daniel Jones. I got to push the envelope with his legs, see if it just starts to shift that defense around, start to move those linebackers around and create some seams, create some pockets, create some opportunities for Saquon Barkley back into that run game, because balance is always going to be critical for this team. And the ledger always needs to be, for them to win games more often than not, on more rushing success with a complementary amount of passing inside of that. So I was a little bit disappointed that the thing that was working for them a bit, spread it out. I'll compliment Daniel Jones in a really big way here too. There was a play in that game, and I'll forget exactly where it was. He dropped back. Multiple defenders were in his face, and he did something that I didn't necessarily know he was fully capable of. It's that little spin move to get out of the pocket, get out of pressure, and then use his legs and take off. We always think about him as being fast, but not necessarily tight space quickness. He showed that. He showed instinctual elusiveness back in the pocket as things were breaking down. I got it. Let him go. Let him go. Like, make this a Daniel Jones game where he uses every piece of his arsenal. Have him throw 3 touchdowns and 2 interceptions and use his legs and run for 100. Like, make this a showcase against Dallas. Whatever the score ends up being, put everything out there on the table, because I was disappointed in what they didn't maybe lean into more against Detroit.
Adam, at the end of the day, my friend, Jones is going to need that athleticism against the Dallas Cowboy defense. They are game wreckers. Micah Parsons and DeMarcus Lawrence are just 2 of many guys on that team that can get to the quarterback. No Wandale Robinson, out with an ACL. The little security blanket over the middle is not going to be there. We'll see if Richie James is going to be there. It's going to be the Golladay and Slayton show on the outside. I mean, what a turn back it would be if Kenny Golladay on Thanksgiving, when the Lions always used to play, and that's when we remember seeing him, comes out and is a key contributor in this game. But to your point, they're going to have to change up the game plan. It is going to be very interesting to see what Kafka dials up. Is he going to stick with the heavy run first with Saquon and Breida and even maybe a little bit of Brightwell in there? Or is he going to open it up and say, we got to use Jones's legs and we got to get the ball outside the markers?
It's the reminder of what this season was coming in, and trying to couch that frustration inside of understanding There's a lot of turnover on this roster. Andy and I debated a percentage after the podcast yesterday that we'll talk about down the road here at some point. We'll talk about this is a great footnote for later, but I want to give Andy credit now in this week about Wandale Robinson being injured. And then just a little thought here. He may be the only wide receiver on this roster next season that's currently playing for the New York Football Giants. Interesting things to kind of marinate on. Friends, tomorrow will be more positive, and we'll talk about the ways in which maybe the Giants can have success on Thursday, on Thanksgiving, against those Dallas Cowboys, and if there is an opportunity for them to stay very much in that playoff picture beyond this upcoming game. Until then, though, you get over to YouTube, you subscribe to the channel, you leave a comment, you get it on the live sessions. We always appreciate the interaction with the fans. It means the world to us. You get us on the podcast feed wherever you get those needs fulfilled as well. Until next time, though, as Andy Makowitz would want, need, and nay, demand the people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.